Alright, on this 72 Super 6, we're going to clean up the input jacks. First of all, take a look at the color of the nuts and washers, how browned they are compared to those zinc toothed washers. So while I do the other stuff, the nuts and washers are going to go into a WD-40 bath, and we'll check out the color when they come out. Okay, we're going to start with the input jacks on the normal channel. You can see again that discoloration versus the original color, so that'll get cleaned. But first, I want to address that popping when you plug in and out of the jacks. That popping could be a sign that that 1 meg is failed. Could just be poor contact with the chassis. The nuts were very loose. But anyway, what that resistor does is two things. First of all, it keeps a constant ground reference for the grid of V1A, and on the other channel, keeps a constant grid reference to V2A, because these triodes, V1A and V2A, are cathode biased, which means that there's a positive voltage at the cathode, and there needs to be a lower voltage, in this case hopefully 0 volts, at the grid. But for that grid to work, it also has to have a ground reference. When nothing is plugged into the amp, that ground reference is straight at ground. When a guitar is plugged into the amp, that ground reference is whatever the resistance of the pot in the guitar is in parallel with this 1 meg. And this 1 meg is just there to keep the ground constant no matter the position of the switch. If this were to fail, then at the moment that something is plugged in, it goes from having a ground reference to not having any ground reference at all, and then to the ground reference to the pickup. You can decrease this if you want to darken the sound that the guitar has plugged in, though that means that as you roll back on the volume, things get too dark. You can make it higher, though if you go much higher than 1 meg, you start to have noise issues. So I've plugged a cable in here with nothing plugged into the other side, and I'm going to measure that resistor and see if it's 1 meg. Sorry, this is a little bit hard to do on camera. But anyway, so here's the negative, here's the positive. Nothing's plugged in. I mean, the cable's plugged in, but there's no guitar at the other end of it. 1.053 meg. So that resistor is good. So I think we probably just had poor contact to the chassis, and I know we've got poor contact on the normaling parts of the jack. What do I mean by normaling? Let me unplug this, the rest of this. The way this works, let me get this to focus, is that you have the sleeve, which is this part of the jack, which goes straight to this lug here, which is usually tied to ground. When this is installed in the amp properly and tightened, that is grounded to chassis. You have the tip, which is what the cable again. The tip of the plug, which is the positive from your guitar or other instrument, goes here. But you have this little bit of metal here in this jack, in this switchcraft switched jack. And when nothing is plugged in, these two pieces of metal contact each other. And when you plug into the guitar, the cable, they become separated. This is also tied to ground. You can see, can you see? Let's see. Let me get the other one, it'll be easier to see. This is the ground. This is the shunt or sleeve or tip normal, and there's the tip connection here. And you see this wire, it's part of the resistor. which means that this little small piece of metal is grounded. So when nothing is plugged in, this should have ground on it as well. And as soon as you plug it in, that separates. If there is dirt or corrosion in here, which there is, or if the metal is fatigued and bent back so they don't contact, then when nothing is plugged into the amp, you have hum and buzz and yucky noise. And as you might have heard in the previous video on this amp, that's exactly what we have. So I want to clean the points of contact here, where the tip of the sleeve makes contact. I want to clean all the metal so it makes good contact with the chassis, including on the rear part of the panel itself. And I want to make sure that I have good contact on each jack right there. Now, there are lots of ways to do that, from chemicals to special burnishing tools. But I find that even decades of corrosive buildup leaves a fairly minor film on it. There's just not a lot of material there that's interfering. So I get a little strip, 1000 grit wet dry sandpaper. And since it's wet dry, I put a little bit of deoxit on it. I fold it in half. This is very fine grit. Not going to remove much material at all. And I put that in there. And then I remove the plug. And that's squeezed in place. And I just pull it out. And I repeat that a few times. And that usually removes whatever funk is in there. And I can do a little bit by hand as well. But it's not going to remove any plating. It's not going to score the metal. This is a very mild abrasive. Do the same thing to the other side. And I will repeat the same process on the input jacks of the vibrato channel, the reverb channel. Just using a little bit. It's hard to do this looking through the camera. Just that little bit of deoxit on that wet dry should do the trick. Now that one doesn't have as much pressure as that one, which is odd because normally this is the jack that gets more use over the years. Now that I've done that, I need to make sure that I don't have any little bits of grit from that sandpaper in there. But that is relatively simple. I keep dropping this thing. That looks pretty good, actually. Let's check out the other one. All right, so that's good. Let me get it. Sorry, I just dropped a whole bunch of screws. I'll edit this bit out. Okay, let's clean these surfaces. Deoxit is our friend, as long as we're using it in the places it was designed for. Don't use it in tube sockets. It doesn't take a lot. It does a lot of the work itself just because of its nature. I just want to make sure the places where things make contact have it. And then I take that little bit of wet dry that I already had out. Let's see if I can do this. It's hard to do this with the camera here. as to the insides of these, I rarely find it necessary to do anything heroic. That said, if I needed to, there are special brushes for cleaning out the insides of pipes that work for that kind of thing. Not a pipe cleaner in the sense most people know. That's for tobacco pipes. But there are little wire brushes of different diameters that could be used for this. I've just not found it that necessary. Now, before I do anything else, I want to make sure that these grid stopper resistors here, which are also setting the gain difference, are measuring okay. They're supposed to be 68K each, so I should be able to measure across either one of them and get about 34K. A little bit hard to do when it's up in the air like this. 34.99K. 34.99K. So they measure okay. That does not mean that they are good, but they measure okay. The next point of concern once I put this back is this solder joint here. That can sometimes crack when you reinsert it. But I've got to wait until the WD-40 bath, the WD-40 bath for the front nuts and hardware have come in out of the bath. I can't talk. Before I put all this back and test it, I've got to wait for the hardware to come out of its WD-40 bath. So I'm going to pause this, do the same thing to the input jacks on the other side, on the other channel, and then we'll see if all this has solved the problems or whether I need to replace any of those resistors. The WD-40 bath did some good, but not as much as I want, so off to the kitchen to my ultrasonic cleaner. So hopefully after a couple of times in this, the input jack hardware will be as I want it to look. This does not want to focus on this. Anyway, this thing is great. You can get them all over Amazon, sold for cleaning jewelry, but they're fantastic for this. I mentioned in the knobs on the 68 Super Reverb that some Fender knobs lose their ink in devices like this. So, you know, go slow, figure out what works and what doesn't. But for cleaning old hardware, this thing can be fantastic. Okay, 2 cycles, full cycles later, all the cloudiness in the water and white vinegar mixture is stuff that used to be on this hardware. Now, these are pretty, but they've been in water. Water and metal, not a good combination. So back in the WD-40 bath, let it earn its water displacement name. And then I'll dry them off and should be good to go. So much prettier. Okay, ready to go back in service. So much prettier now. Everything back in place. And now all extraneous noises that were there before, even with the volumes off. If I just touch these input jacks, those are gone. If I raise the volume on each channel a little bit, you can hear the relative high self noise for the amp still. That'll be addressed. But messing with these input jacks no longer makes it terrible. Let me recreate the problem that it used to have. If I separate this shunt, now let's plug into each channel and see if that popping is gone. So I find the other end of the guitar cable. All right, so let's do the normal channel first, see if it pops. top, cleaned that pot, and all the scratchiness off that volume is gone. Let's try the low gain jack, just make sure there's no problem with it. That's good. Now let's go on to the vibrato channel. All the buzz is gone. No noise in the pots. No popping. A little bit popping on that low gain. That might just be a drop of contact cleaner still in between the shunt and the tip. It's gone now. Well, the popping seems to be gone. So what I think it probably was just a little bit of residue from all the cleaning solutions on the between the tip and the tip normal on these jacks, and the very active plugging in and unplugging and plugging in and unplugging cured that. So I think the amp is going to be pretty damn healthy. We're going to be changing the filter caps out and changing this back to 1972 spec, but an awful lot of the noise is already gone just by fixing the input jacks. And until the input jacks are good, I cannot know what other issues there may be in the amp, because remember that before the thing was making awful noises even with nothing plugged in. That'll lessen as it gets switched more. Anyway, this thing's going to be great. So good maintenance on the input jacks. This applies to pretty much every Fender made from what about 53 to maybe before that to now, in terms of how the circuit works. The way these things were built changed in the early 80s. But if you have a silver face, a black panel, I should say, a brown face, tweeds, and you've got issues with your input jacks, these same fixes apply to them all. And that little ultrasonic cleaner I have has paid for itself many times over.